podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Taylor. One of the nerds over here at the Sourcepass Center of Excellence for Microsoft. I'm excited to jump in today and kick off a new series. We're going to do probably 3 episodes on the topic of Azure cost management. So lots of fun stuff to unpack there. Kind of one of those topics that's got a lot of details, is not super technical, but is kind of super detailed. So it should be fun to dig into it. Our podcast here, the goal behind it is to be your source for demystifying the complicated ecosystem of Microsoft products and pricing and partners and solutions. It's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot to keep up with. And we want to be your source for those answers to understand what's going on in the Microsoft world. I know there's a lot of people managing their Azure infrastructure and trying to navigate all these things. So we're excited to jump in and just talk through some of that. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. We appreciate all of you jumping in and supporting the podcast. Getting some good feedback even from some of our customers. So keep listening and keep giving that feedback to your account team. And we look forward to continuing to produce content that's useful to everybody. So let's jump in. Let's talk about Azure. Let's start at the beginning and talk about what is Azure. Microsoft Azure is a family of solutions, and it's kind of a very large product from Microsoft. But one way to think of it is it's kind of various forms of infrastructure, or to kind of use maybe a different analogy, it's plumbing. It's what all the technologies that you want to use can run through Microsoft's plumbing instead of your own. It's this infrastructure where you can run servers or networking or data or AI or websites, or all these different solutions can be run on Microsoft servers and Microsoft data centers. And you can run it many different ways, from all the way down at the level where you're just renting a server for a couple of hours to running thousands of servers and giant networks and multi-location across the globe, to just running a simple website, to running your DNS, to running your all kinds of stuff, just basic storage. It's a tool that could be used for any number of things. And in fact, Microsoft even allows like third parties to run and host and sell their solutions from Azure. So Azure kind of becomes a marketplace. And so it's this kind of complicated topic where I was like, oh, I want to go to Azure. Well, there's a lot of details to talk through there. And we, of course, are happy to help people talk through when it makes sense to migrate to Azure and when it doesn't. And that might be a really good episode to put as one, maybe the 4th in this series. We've talked about a little bit of that with Jeff on our hybrid environment conversations about when it makes sense to be in Azure or not from an infrastructure perspective. But many of you have resources in Azure. You've either bought third-party solutions that are hosted in Azure. Maybe you've moved a server or two up there, or you're hosting an application you're developing in Azure. So Azure is a really common resource that many of our customers have and are taking advantage of. And one of the things that happens when you're running Azure is Azure is consumption-based. So as you use it, Microsoft bills you for it. So when we buy Microsoft 365 licenses, you actually prepay for the month. So you buy the month ahead and pay Microsoft for the right to use that environment as a prepay functionality. Azure is a post-pay consumption-based model. So for whatever you use, Microsoft charges you for it. And it makes it really flexible. So you can go spin up a server for a couple of hours, use it, shut it down, and you're not paying for that server for, all the costs it would take to build that server farm or that data center or running it for years. You can pay it for 2 hours if you want to. That goes on your Azure bill. At the end of the month, Microsoft sends us a bill for Azure and we bill you. But sometimes that billing can kind of start to snowball on you. It can get complicated. That bill can grow, and it can be hard at times to understand why you have the same amount of infrastructure in Azure, but a year later it's costing you 20, 30, 40% more. And that's where we want to help. And so in this series, we're going to talk through at a high level what Azure is, how the pricing works, how you can manage that, some of the cost saving levers we can pull, and then I'll show you some more details around that. And then we can talk about some of the solutions we can offer on that front to help you manage that in an ongoing basis. And then we'll talk later about what it looks like to move resources, be able to, sorry, I lost my train of thought about when it makes sense to move things into Azure, because that actually really builds into the pricing conversation. It's an important aspect of that, of the long-term return on investment for Azure is something that's definitely worth evaluating. And so we'll talk through that as well. So when you transact Azure, Azure is billed through subscriptions and Azure plans. And, on the back end, there's some complications, but the reality is you're probably paying for Azure one of a couple different ways. You're paying through your current licensing provider, a CSP, like Sourcepass MCOE. We sell Azure to a lot of our customers, and it's just one of the subscriptions we manage and bill for them. You can also buy it direct from Microsoft, where you just go to the Azure website, you click set up a trial for me, put in a credit card number, and you go. And then the third variable that a lot of people end up buying Azure through is through their enterprise agreement. Larger companies enter into these agreements with Microsoft where they agree to a 3-year term, and Microsoft gives them certain discounts, assuming that they'll, as part of the agreement, that they'll pay for it for 3 years. And Azure actually becomes a key part of that, in that you often commit to multiple years of Azure costs. You kind of say, I don't think I'm going to spend less than 10 grand a month in Azure. And then you've committed to 36 grand worth of Azure spend as part of that EA agreement. So the first thing we talk about is if you're struggling with your Azure billing, we're happy to help with that no matter where you're billing. If you're billing through an EA, you're billing direct, you're billing even through another partner, we're happy to take a look, help you evaluate that. We'll do some high-level consulting for you on that at the beginning. If you want a more detailed roadmap and plan, we usually charge for a full Azure cost management engagement for 2 reasons. Number one, it takes some of my more advanced engineers some time to actually put the thought in to go evaluate your environment and give you recommendations. And oftentimes we're going to use a third-party tool that helps with some visuals and really show you your opportunity to save money. And so there are some costs to us to doing a full Azure cost management engagement. But nothing we're doing on that engagement is rocket science, and I'm going to share a bunch of it on this call. There's no super secret sauce. It's just experience, having done it multiple times, that is the reason we need to pay for those resources. So hit us up if you would like help with this. If you'd like to move your billing to a different partner, that is an option. Microsoft allows you to take your billing that's direct or on EA or from another partner and move it to a different partner. The advantage of going to a partner is hopefully that partner can provide some of this cost management resources as part of their engagement. And oftentimes there are different ways they can also help you save money through discounts or rebates or other incentives that they can build. And we'd love to talk to you about those options if you reach out to us about your Azure engagement. So there's a lot of variables there. When you do have an Azure subscription, if you're buying it direct, you have access to pricing data. It'll show up in the Azure cost management section of the Azure portal. If you're buying it through a partner, sometimes those partners disable that functionality. That is an option as a partner that they have. Generally speaking, we don't disable that. We want you to see what you're billing because we want you to see your costs and be able to manage that, because we understand what value that is there. We want to make sure that we're a valuable part of the chain and we're not making it more difficult. So if you don't have the Azure cost management in your Azure portal, it's likely that either your partner's not giving you access or maybe your account doesn't have access to that data. It is a set of data that has the permissions around it in the role-based access. And so maybe you need to find out who's your account owner or your partner and have them make sure you can see that. That's a critical step in being able to understand what's going on with your Azure. It does produce some decent reporting and timelines, and so you can start to see what your costs are over time. And let me pull up some images of that. I don't have a tenant I can show you, but I will pull up an example from just a quick search here. I'll share my screen here. Here we go. Nope, wrong one. How about this one? Here we go. All right. So this is an example of what Azure cost management can look like. It has these nice graphs, and you can dig into those details to understand what is going on with your Azure subscription and see where the spend is going over time and start to optimize it through some of that reporting. So I highly recommend checking that out. That's a great resource for you to review. There's also a section in there called Azure Advisor, which will give you some of the recommendations we're going to talk about today. There are some common ways to save money in Azure, and Microsoft will actually help you with some of those with their own heuristics, and will give you that information through the Azure Advisor page. We are going to go into detail over this series, probably especially in episode 2, about what Azure Advisor often recommends and how those things work. Those are things like right-sizing VMs, Azure reservations, Azure saving plans, and Azure hybrid use benefit. So those some of the things we can do to really dial in the pricing. The key with this section here with the cost management is to understand where the majority of the cost is. And that becomes probably the most important step. A lot of times people have multiple subscriptions, multiple resource groups, multiple Azure plans, and they just know that their Azure bill keeps growing and they don't understand why. Common reasons for bills growing is that not all resources in Azure are the same cost. There are some things that are much more expensive. And so if you leave them running, they will drive your bill up. And so, for example, I can store a terabyte of data in one of the low-cost storage methods in Azure for dollars a month indefinitely. And the price never changes. It's just a flat fee. Technically, Azure bills by the minute. I think we get billing reporting by the hour. But that has a set cost for that much data in a storage blob account, in archive storage per hour, and that's not going to change over time. You can store that data there, and it's a consistent cost. It will change based on the number of days in a month. So if you have it'll cost you less in February than it does in November, but it's a pretty static cost. Where costs can start to balloon on you is especially larger VMs. You want to build out a really big VM in Azure, want to run it, 16 core, 120 gigs of RAM, virtual machine. Those costs can be large. We're talking, a couple dollars an hour, dozens of dollars an hour, depending on the size of it as a video card. And you can spend thousands of dollars a month on a VM. Well, if you spin up a couple of VMs and don't realize it, and the next month your bill was a couple grand higher, that's why some of those VMs are expensive. There are other things that often cause some Azure costs to grow on you. And a common one is you're running something that's collecting logs, something like an Azure cost management. Sorry, not Azure cost management, brain fart. Microsoft Sentinel. Microsoft Sentinel is Microsoft's security automation and SIEM and SOC tool. Really powerful tool, does some great stuff. But one of the things you can do is you can wire in all these services to send it log data. And the more log data you give to Sentinel, the more cool things it can do. And it can look for patterns and threat actors and breaches and all these things that it can give your security team data on. But the default place it lands in is a log analytics workspace. And that is expensive storage in the Azure world. And so if you're just pumping in logs from every firewall and every endpoint and every server and every event log and all these things, and you're not doing any sort of filtering or cleanup or storing historical logs in a different solution, or maybe tiering your storage, there's a number of ways we can address it. Azure Sentinel can quickly be something where you're paying $2,000 a month for it 1 month, and 6 months later it's $10,000 a month, because you have all these logs you're storing, and those all bill. Every gigabyte of logs bills you by the hour for the storage of it. So it can get away from you. And so cost management, this cost management portal becomes a really key tool to go find out where your money's going and why, and even see some historical data about that. We also have third-party tools we'll get into later that'll allow us to do other reporting on that can pull this data together. And so we can dig into some of the details of how that works as we get deeper into some of the variables. The next thing I'm going to show you and we're going to talk about is the Azure pricing calculator. This is a free tool you can get on the internet. Just Google Azure pricing calculator. It's on Microsoft's site, and it has all of their solutions that you could run in Azure. Anything you can think of in Azure, we can go run. And this allows you to go build these things out and see what they cost. And so as an example here, and we're going to spend a little bit of time in this calculator over this upcoming months, upcoming meetings, because I want to share how this tool can really demonstrate some of the cost saving measures. But you can see here, you can come in here on just a VM and you can choose a different data center. Different data centers have different costs based on capacity. So if there's a very popular East US data center that a lot of big businesses are in, and you want a popular data it's VM size that's constrained, they don't have a lot of, it will be more expensive in that data center than another data center like West US 3. It might be cheaper in that data center. So that impacts your pricing, whether you're running Windows Server or Linux Server or Windows 10 impacts your pricing, whether you're running SQL impacts your pricing. There's multiple tiers for VMs. And then we can kind of come in here and show that there are about 40 different families of VMs, and those also affect the pricing. And so those VMs are priced based on the amount of CPU and RAM and disk speed capability and also graphics card access. Those are kind of the main variables that drive the different sizes. And this is daunting if you've never looked at this before. It's a lot of details, but as you get into it, you start to learn that a lot of these letters in these families all mean something, and you start to learn how to navigate this, and we're happy to help you with it. Um, some of the variables I can point out to you from the beginning are like the A series are really basic entry series. B series are called burstable, which means they're a lot cheaper than other VMs, but they only give you their full performance for a certain amount of time per month, and you can earn credits to use them. D series is a very common set of VMs we use for a lot of general purposes. So are E series. The rest of the letters represent, does it have a local disk? Does it support SSDs as support to standard disks? Version 5 references the version of architecture it's on. Is it on a newer chip? Is it on an older chip? There's A series, which are running AMD chips. F and G have different balances of different resources, whether it's memory or RAM. I don't remember what the L and the W stand for. N series all have NVIDIA video cards in them. So if you're doing AutoCAD or maybe doing some data computation, or you're mining crypto, or you're running some AI models, then the N series becomes valuable. And so it's a set of variables that come together to define the cost of your resource here based on the location, the kind of resource, and then how much you're using it. So you can see here, this is a very expensive VM. Oh, I went big. Oh man, let's go something less daunting. Let's just go with a V4 series. Okay, that's a little bit more reasonable. 4 cores, 14 gigs of RAM. That's $300 a month. So this is the kind of VM, if you were running a maybe some data models you'd run. A DV5 is like a common VM that we'd be running for. Like here's a common VM we'd run for a server in a business environment. 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, $500 a month. We'll get into these sections then here about cost savings. This will be a full episode next time where we talk about the various resources we can manage there for you. Back to the high level though, we talked about we had that cost management tab. So the first step in understanding why what's going on with your Azure costs is understanding what you're running. And so this is going to need to involve some of your nerds to understand what they're building, understand requirements. The recommendations that come from various tools will give you data points. And so the first step in really getting your Azure costs under control is understanding what you're running, because we're going to ask questions later on in the process that require us to know the resources we have and which ones we think are going to be around long term, which ones are right sized. So one of the recommendations you're going to get from Advisor first off the bat is it's going to find any disks that are unused, VMs that are underutilized, and it's going to recommend either turning them off or resizing them to a smaller size that fits the resource requirements of what you're doing. So you may have a VM spec'd for 4 cores and 32 gigs of RAM, but it's not doing anything. It's just a lightweight utility server. It's just running a reporting agent. It's going to recommend that you go to like a 2-core 8 gig of RAM VM because it's going to save you 60%, but that's all that server's using, and it just takes the metrics of what it's been doing over time and gives you that data. So the number one thing we're going to start with in Azure cost management is understanding our environment and then starting to do cleanup. Can we consolidate down our servers? Can we get them to a size that's closer to their performance needs? Can we clean up old servers? One of the things we see a lot is that people will build out servers and then forget their testing environments, or they'll leave a server running. And the way Azure works is if the server is running, it's billing you for the compute infrastructure. So if it's something used once a month for testing, you can shut it down into a state called deallocated. And in that state, the disk still exists. It can be turned on in an instant, but it's not charging you for the compute costs because it's deallocated. If you put it into a stop state but not deallocated, that means that it's actually still reserving resources on that server and you're still paying for it. So it's important to understand which of your resources you want to keep around. Are they properly sized? And then to understand your long-term plans with those resources. That sets the baseline for everything we're going to do going forward. When we understand our environment, we understand the purpose of those VMs and the requirements for their performance and how they're working and what we're doing, then we can get into the next piece, which is all of the cost savings measures are built on top of that, because they go into, can we schedule downtime and pay less money because we're going to turn it off when we're not using it? Can we say, hey, we don't want to turn it off, but we're going to use the same VM the same way for 3 years. So Azure, charge me less for running this VM for 3 years. Those are the sorts of things we can get into our later conversations, and we'll dig into the details on how that works out in our cost management tool conversation and really talk through those variables. The other variable to look at is a lot of times people are also running Azure Virtual Desktop. It's a service we love. It's a great way to get people onto kind of a desktop environment in the cloud. It's kind of like remote desktop, if you remember that, or Citrix from back in the day. It's Azure's hosted version of that. It's very secure, very stable, very scalable. But the one thing about it is it does require some management. We have some great third-party tools that can help you through managing it. But it's the same conversation. How many servers you need? What's the right level of scaling? Can they be turned off after hours, or can we scale them back after hours? And finding that nuanced answer can really save you a lot of money over time. So we'll dig more into detail about these various cost-saving measures in our next call. Main thing I want to talk about today was just get a high-level understanding of what Azure is, how it's built. Like I said, you can move your Azure subscriptions to different providers, including us. If it's with another provider, that's a pretty painless move. We just connect with the other provider, and there's kind of a back-end transfer, and the billing goes through us as opposed to them. If you're direct with Microsoft, we can also transfer it in and get it off your credit card, get it onto an invoice, simplify that billing process. But there is a little more disruption there. There's a few resources that have to be turned off for the transition, like VMs have to be turned off. Not disruptive. We do it all the time. There's no risk to it. It just has to be scheduled and planned out. So the advantage of doing that, getting it to a partner like us, is that you get the opportunity for additional incentives and discounts. You have the opportunity to start paying for it via an invoice as opposed to on your credit card. And allows that partner to kind of give you additional support and gives you access to their support resources on the back end. We have access to support resources that consumers and general businesses don't have the same level of support with Microsoft. So those are some of the advantages to moving your resources to us. And like I said, we'd love to chat with you. If you have questions here, we'll sit down, we'll walk you through it. We're going to talk you through some of the high level stuff at the beginning. And then if you want a really detailed report, we'll run some of our tooling, get our engineers to build that up and build a game plan for you. If you aren't managing your Azure resources carefully and you have a large spend, you're spending 5, 10, 20, 30 grand a month, there's a really good chance we can save you 10 to 40% with some basic changes just by having a conversation with us. So we'd love to see what we can do for you. Give our team a call, sourcepassmcoe.com. But I'd love to continue this conversation. Next week, we'll get into the real details of the different savings levers and explain how they all work carefully. The week after that, we will dig into some tool sets, and then we'll have a deeper conversation about when it makes sense to go to Azure and when it doesn't. But hopefully this conversation is useful to you. I know a lot of people are asking about cost management right now in the Azure space, and we're here to help. at the Sourcepass Center of Excellence for Microsoft. That's what we're here for, to help you navigate the complicated world of Microsoft solutions, whether it's Azure or Microsoft 365 or Copilot. We're here to help, and we look forward to catching you on the next one. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and we appreciate your time today. Talk to you soon.